She's muted. We can't hear anything. Can't hear. The speaker's muted. Is anybody listening? Can you hear me, Yael?
Hang on. Okay, we're good. Sorry, you can hear me now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I'm working with lovely human beings, virtually and in live, and a laptop and a computer and a screen and a slideshow. So please forgive me for the for delay. Hello, it looks like we have some nice new friends on Zoom. So I'm looking here at you, and you're also on the laptop, and so nice for you to join us. So here we have amazing technology for those of you who have not been here yet for this. We're doing a hybrid. I'm live. The people on Zoom can hear me. They're generally on mute unless they want to share something important. And at the end, I really want to leave a few minutes for anyone on Zoom who wants to say something. And we're going to begin. בסוף זה מה לא עובד. כן, עכשיו, I figured out how to unmute. לא, זה בסדר. We also had a source sheet glitch. I apologize. The source sheets are coming in a few minutes, and it's okay. And on the one you got this morning is not correct, so I apologize. It's being corrected. And anyway, I'm going to share my slideshow in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to jump into our learning. That was a lot of public service announcements. Everything okay over there? Are you looking at what you have on the? Okay. Accidentally, they put on the Google Drive last week's. So this week's is coming to you and to the Drive in just a few minutes. But anyway, I share my slideshow. Don't worry. Okay. Well, do you have a copy of last week's? Yes, and I'll get it to you after class. Okay, for sure. In fact, we have too many copies of last week's now. So this week's story sheet is coming. Hang in. Okay, before we begin, I absolutely love when this happens. My students from previous years know this. It's funny when you plan a class and you're like, there must be on some level of consciousness, your awareness that it's actually having to do with something going on in real time in the real world, but you don't realize it until the morning of. So you get me. So the whole class today, which we're...
Aaron?
Yes.
We cannot see your face. We cannot see your face. We cannot see your face because you're standing and the camera is not on your face.
A good point. I'm nearly headless Karen. Tammy, I'm so sorry. Apparently they can only see from neck down. This institution does not erase women's faces, I promise. Okay. I'm sorry, that must have been so annoying. I have to tell you, Rebecca probably does this. There was a teacher in my son's high school who all of Zoom for months and months and months always had the camera from here up. And it must have been so annoying for him. So I apologize. Okay. Okay, everyone, try to listen up. The glitches are being sorted, and I apologize. So what are we talking about today? Today, we are talking about time. And I had planned a whole class to talk about time and how the day is divided into, we talked about this a little bit last week, into a natural rhythm of days and nights, nights to days. Everything okay? So we're talking about how the day is divided into nights to day, day to night. And it's incredibly significant that this is how the beginning of Shas, the beginning of Mishnah and Talmud begins. You should have a source sheet that says source 1, Talmud Brachot 2b to 3a. Everyone has that? Excellent. Okay. So here I am planning this class, which is all about what is time and how we determine time in our day. What does a unit of a day mean in our lives? And as I'm putting in my last touches on the slideshow, I think, oh yeah, we just changed the clocks. That's so interesting how that connects. So first of all, who actually, raise your hand if you actually like the changing of the clocks. Interesting poll. So
only that day when we get an extra.
On Zoom, you're raising your hand if you like daylight savings and change. Some of you haven't changed your clocks yet, but in theory, do you like it? I don't see any hands. So why do you like it, Susie?
Well, I like getting the extra hour, but yesterday when I looked out the window, I'm thinking like, it looks like it's raining. The sky's getting dark.
Yes.
I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like 4:30.
Exactly, and it's already, yes, Doug.
I think they do it backwards. I mean, I've always said that.
That's so interesting.
Because I don't need light at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., or whatever there is. But
Right.
to have it get dark at 4 is
Yes.
preposterous.
Yes.
So I think it should be done the other way around, if it's done at all, rather than just leave it alone.
So
And they say it's because the cow, and I've never met a cow who could read a clock.
So just to repeat, to include our people, our friends on Zoom, in case you can't hear, there's a great debate in the world of whether to continue this custom, this practice of changing the clocks twice a year, biannually. And in fact, it started at a time where, most people didn't have electricity, and it was about creating a situation where people had daylight when they woke up, made it easier to get up. And their daily rhythm was probably quite different than ours. They probably, especially the farmers, got up earlier.
Well,
and
it's an agricultural reason.
Exactly, there were agricultural good reasons for it. And but today, what's been shown is that it also has some significant detriments. Apparently, from the time that we changed the clocks, God forbid, nothing bad should happen to anyone here. The rate of heart attacks go up. The rate of depression goes up because suddenly many more hours of your wake time in our lives, how we live, is dark. Because you wake up and it's late, but it gets dark so much earlier. And there's economic.
I will say, I don't like it. But apparently in Israel specifically, a lot of people who need to get work early, they need to be able to travel in the morning.
Yes.
And before the clocks change, it's really, really difficult. So it's not a worldwide thing. It's very specific to Israel.
Yes.
I mean, yes, a few people everywhere in the world, but it's very, so
yes.
It actually has a religious significance for people, which is its own...
Very interesting, right? Very interesting. So I just wanted to raise this because it's incredibly interesting that one of the things, what's not working? No, but there is a blower, a grass blower. You can't hear so well?
I'm going to try and move them out, but can you actually sit and we can make it just be right on top of it?
I can't sit, but I'll just speak into it. Is it on? It's on mute. Oh, okay.
Just ask if I
Let's do
can
a
hear you.
test.
Ask if I can hear you.
Can you guys hear? Well, ask, yeah, I always yell, gives me good, how is the sound? Better?
We can hear you fine, but we're hearing the leaf blower even worse than when you were out in the tent.
That's pretty impressive. Okay, so I will sit I'll try to sit. It's very hard for me to sit for a little bit.
To move around.
Yeah.
So please excuse me.
It's usually very calm here, very exciting today.
Can you put yourself on mute for 1 second?
Put myself on mute?
No, don't worry. I just don't want you to...
Okay, wait, it's okay. We're trying to deal with the leaf blower. Hang on. If we close the blinds? No, okay. We're going to try and get rid of the leaf blower in just a moment. Okay. So, hi. Uh-oh. Mute?
Karen, we cannot hear you.
Okay, how are we sounding on Zoom? You can hear me? Okay, great. Okay, we're dealing with the leaf blower. Now we have to, okay, let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, hang on. Okay, so we're talking about changing the clocks and the effects on people. And it really points to the fact that we have this very, I think we have quite an entrenched, ingrained, some people are very in tune with the light and the dark. Other people are very out of sync with the light and the dark. And this really puts its finger on the fact that historically, in the time of the Mishnah and Talmud especially, daylight was when people were productive, and nighttime was when they went to sleep, and there was limited amount of light and the ability to be productive during those hours. And so there's something about figuring out, and so it's a very interesting thing that this is the topic that is at the very beginning of our Talmud, at the very beginning of how we start the book which dictates our Jewish life, that there's something about the day and the framing of the day which is significant. Okay, so we're gonna jump in, because we lost some time, I apologize. We're gonna jump in, we're now on, last week, just to refresh your memories, we last week talked about the first Mishnah, and the first Mishnah also discusses time, and I think it's fascinating. The first question of the first word of the first Mishnah is a question, me'ematai, from when, right? And so just a really quick review. Sorry, this is actually not the Mishnah. This is the first Gemara, but just to remind you that the first Mishnah was me'ematai. And then the first Gemara talks about this word me'ematai. Why does the Gemara start with the question, from when do we say Shema at night? Okay, and what were the two questions? Who remembers from last week? The two questions about why the Mishnah starts this way, the Gemara's first two questions. One was, okay, how do we know? I know this is why we're doing review. You have to do review with Gemara because it's intense on the brain. It's like brain exercise. So me'ematai, from when, how do we know that we need to say Shema at night, says the Gemara. Why does the Mishnah, the first Mishnah of all of Brachot, start with, from when do we say Shema at night? Why doesn't it start with, how do we know that we have to say Shema at night and in the morning? So it makes an assumption right from the beginning. And I think it's a very interesting thing that it does that. I think it talks about the role of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, which is building on the written Torah. And that's why the Talmud comes and fills in and says, well, we already have the written Torah telling us, B'shachbacha u'bekumecha, when you lay down and when you wake up, which is the time that you lay down and the time you wake up. And therefore, we know you need to say it at night. We only don't know from when until when, which is the subject of the Mishnah. Then asks the second question. The Gemara asks, why do we start with the night? Why do we start with Shema of the night? Why don't we start with Shema of the morning? And the Gemara has the same answer, one answer for two questions, which is that we have the pasuk, B'shachbacha u'vekumecha, that the Jewish day starts with the nighttime and then the day, even though those words, when you lie down and when you go to sleep, don't indicate that. And for that reason, the Gemara then says, we have another verse that teaches us that this is the rhythm of the Jewish day, the story of creation. Vaye'erev vayevoker yom echad. It was night, it was day, the first day. And so our Gemara now builds, really embellishes, fills in all this stuff that's not in the Mishnah. Now, that doesn't mean that the rabbis of the Mishnah didn't know this stuff. They most likely knew this stuff. But the Mishnah was the first attempt to write down the oral law. And so they needed to make a code, a quick, simple, easy code. At the same time, the rabbis, the experts, One, they said these Mishnayot, when they recited these Mishnayot, because most people didn't have books, most of these rabbis memorized this stuff, and it started to be written down in the time of the Mishnah. So the Gemara, if the rabbis of the Gemara, the rabbis of the Mishnah know the biblical sources. They're not telling us because that's not the purpose of the Mishnah. Comes the Gemara and elaborates on the Mishnah and fills in all of this information. Perfect timing. No, because we had all this like noise and crazy and glitches. Came just for the calm. And to remind you, the first verse of creation, the source from creation, Vayera Vayvoker Yom Echad, also the word Yom Echad is unusual, right? Which might also be a interesting literary technique that the rabbis are using. They're saying, we're talking about the Shema, we're talking about the night coming before the day, and there's a famous midrash that it doesn't say Yom Rishon, it says, which normally all the other days say Yom Rishon, Sunday, Monday, Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, we have Yom Echad, which reminds us of Hashem Echad from the Shema. So and in fact, Rashi tells us that it's Yom Echad to teach us that there's one God in this world. There may be many creations, but there's always one God. And so there's a thematic connection between this rhythm of the day to night and the Shema itself. And I think that it's also important to the rabbis, they view themselves on some level as this is the beginning. If Bereshit is the beginning of Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, this is the beginning of the oral Torah. So those are some of the review from last time. You'll remember that we spoke about a number of themes in our sources. So I'm really just going to run through them because this is review from last week, which will help you as we go forward. We're going to see some of these themes throughout the semester. We start, the beginning of Mishnah and Talmud Brachot deals with the structure of the day being from night to day and that there's a certain rhythm there. The connection between the oral Torah and the written Torah. These are all things that we are touching on in just the first few lines of Masechet Brachot. What is time and how do we spend our time? The word echad. Okay, I'm going to skip over the next one. Preserving the memory of the Mikdash, and also how we live Jewish life after the destruction of the Mikdash. So you'll remember, what does the Mishnah say about from when? This one you better remember. I'm giving you a second to jog your memories. From when do we say Shema at night? From what time do we say Shema at night? The Mishnah says from the time that, excellent. So from the time that the Kohanim, the priests, go in to eat their truma, okay? What would happen was they had to purify themselves and then afterwards could go eat the holy food, the truma. And we said, this is very odd. Why don't you just say, you say Shema from whatever time it is. Is it Tzet HaKochavim, when the stars appear? Is it Shkia? Why do we have to mention the priests? And we're going to see today, this is a theme that comes out a lot today, that there's this constant dance in the beginning of Masechet Brachot and in the Talmud in general, between remembering life when it was at its pinnacle of Jewish spirituality and we had the Mikdash and preserving that in our life, and at the same time, making sure we have a Judaism that continues to live and thrive after the destruction. We had the comparison and contrasting between the Kohen and the poor, which we're going to get back to in just a minute. And that's it for now. So we're going to continue with our theme. So now we jump in. Okay. We are now, I'm not going to show you, we're not going to be able to read all of Masechet Brachot this year. So if you feel you want to fill in the gaps and, I can recommend you some podcasts, some shiurim to listen to just to go through what we call bekiut, just read it through. We are taking sections and going deeper so that we can understand a little bit more about what the Talmud is and the methodology of the Talmud and what message the rabbis were trying to get across. And as I've mentioned, it's a legal book, but it's also the book of how to live a vibrant Jewish life, the guide to how to live a vibrant Jewish life. So here we go. We're beginning with something we saw last time, and it's going to take us into today's. Also, the Gemara is very, jumps from topic to topic. So from when do we say the Kriyat Shema at night? Amar Mar, Misha'a she'kohanim nichnasim le'achol b'trumatan. So the Gemara often does this. It's quoting the Mishnah and saying, the Mishnah said the time you start saying Shema is the time that the priests go in to eat their truma, okay? And we don't yet know what time that is. However, we have a problem. Uraminhu, we have a contradiction. Me'ematai korin et Shema ba'arabin, misha'ani nichnas lechol pito b'melach, ad sha'a she'omed lipater mitoch sudato. We have a contradiction. Now, where did this statement come from? What is this statement? It's not in the Mishnah. First of all, just to translate, the statement says, we have another statement from the time of the Mishnah that says, from when do we say Shema at night? So far it's very similar. From the time that a poor person goes in to dip his bread, his pita in salt, until he rises to finish his meal. Okay? So, where did this statement come from? What is this? So, what you need to know is that there were a lot of teachings in the time of the Mishnah, okay? And not all of them made it into the Mishnah, not all the opinions, not all the statements. And so this is a text which the rabbis of Talmud are bringing to help us understand the Mishnah. It is a Tannaitic source as well. It's called a Braita. Braita literally means outside, okay? Because it's outside the Mishnah. So this is an outside source which contradicts our Mishnah. So we have to bring it because we have to understand, why did the Mishnah use the priests and not the poor? Okay, because last time I know many of you actually preferred the statement about the poor people, right? Everything okay over there? You don't have the source sheet?
We're just figuring out, sorry, you may have said this when I was outside. We're on the page that says, we're on the source sheet that says Talmud Barachot 2b3a, right?
Yes, yes.
Last week has a similar beginning, but that's just.
Yes, you're good. Excellent.
Thanks.
So now we have a big question. We have one source that says, when do we say Shema? From the time that the Kohanim eat Truma. We have another source that says, when do we say Shema? From the time the poor person comes in to eat his dinner. Is it the same time? Or is it not the same time? Are they the same thing?
What you said last week was that the poor person is busy during the day trying to make a living or that kind of thing, and doesn't get to come home to eat the dinner
so quickly
until after most
Excellent.
Other people.
Okay, just to repeat, Taibi's pointing out that one possibility is that they're not the same time. Okay, we don't know. We actually don't know. The Gemara is going to tell us. One possibility is the Kohen can go eat his truma right after the stars come out, but the poor man may be working extra hard and may have to stay a little late just to make enough for his pita and his salt. And then maybe he's coming later and eating later, so maybe it's a later time. Another possibility is it's the same time, in which case, why do we have these two comparison points? Why do we have to mention the poor person? Why do we mention the Kohen? What's the significance behind that? And why can't we just say when the stars come out? That would be so much easier. So we're going to see that this theme, we're going to work. This is one of the questions that we're exploring today. But the Gemara gives us, first of all, the Gemara questions this second source, the Braita. Yes.
Can I ask a question? We'll just take a step back.
Yeah.
I'm a little
Please.
Because I don't remember what happened. I was here last week, but just to get a sense of the structure. Last week, did we only do Mishnah?
Okay, so last week we did Mishnah, and then we also did Gemara. The Gemara, remember, asked, why does the Mishnah start this way? Right. And it had those questions, and it brought the psukim, which are the source, the written Torah source. And then it goes on a bit. I'm skipping where it goes on a bit because it's a little bit, we could talk about everything, but there's, we have to focus on some things. And so now we're jumping in, having skipped a few lines, we're jumping in here. Also, we're analyzing the Mishnah. We're analyzing the Mishnah.
There's like the Mishnah, we just keep going back and forth, keep going back to the same line.
Okay, so Rebecca is so helpful that you're saying this, because I also want to say something else about Talmud. It's complicated because when you open the Mishnah is edited and all from the Tannaitic period. The Gemara is honestly a mess. It's very hard. Why is it hard? Because there's a lot of different statements and lines in there from different times. So when we have something in Hebrew, it's most often from Tannaitic times, the earliest times, or early Amoraic times. And so then you have to try and figure out what's the structure here? Which parts of this are earlier? And then we have statements in between in Aramaic, which are weaving everything together and editing. And then we have stuff which seems to be sort of late, edited. So it is, all of it's coming from the Talmudic period, which I'll tell you those dates in a few slides. But it is a little hard to follow the flow because it's not like it's one person writing everything in a very structured way. It's some rabbis have taken sources from different historical periods and weaved them together. And so it's complicated, it's hard to follow. And so we're gonna see, and the only way to get used to that is just to read Gemara and keep reading Gemara and keep reading Gemara, and you never really, and it's always hard. So I hope that answered.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now the Gemara, so we brought a Talmudic source in the Gemara, okay? And we're also gonna look, so far we haven't looked at an original page of Gemara yet, we're gonna do that, don't worry, and you'll see like, it's a little easier like this, but you'll see what it looks like, and I'll be able to highlight for you the way the text flows. So now we have a question. Seifa vadai pliga matnitin, reisha milema pliga matnitin. Okay, so the Mishnah, just to review, what does the Mishnah say? When can you say the Shema? From the time the Kohanim eat their truma until the end of the first watch. Okay, which is at least the first third of nighttime. That's a bunch of hours, right? Now listen to what this says. This says, when can you say Shema at night? From the time the poor man comes in to eat his bread until he gets up from his meal. Are those in parallel? Probably not, right? The first one allowed you 3-4 hours, we don't, depending on how long the night is, right? The second one, how long does the poor man sit there and eat his bread and salt? Right? Probably not very long. He's probably exhausted. Probably eats quickly, there's not much to be excited about there. And then he gets up, he goes to sleep because he has to get up early and work again the next day. So the Gemara clarifies for us that these sources are not in agreement. Their start time might be the same, their finish time is certainly not. But for now, we're just focusing on the start time. Next week, we'll talk about the end time. So the Gemara goes on and says, even though these statements are not 100% in sync, and the Mishnah chose to talk about the Kohanim, we need to learn this also to know that there's different opinions and to see that the start time is the same for the poor person and the Kohen, okay? So the Kohen and the poor person is the same time. Now, last week we talked about the beauty of this, that the Gemara is looking, why can't they just say, go say Shema when the stars come out, okay? Why are they bringing these other examples? And scholars and Perushim have pointed out that there's something deeper going on here. When we say the Shema, what's the meaning behind saying the Shema at night? Well, one thing is we're connecting to our Mikdash, we're connecting to the Kohanim, we're trying to be holy, like the Kohanim eating their truma at night. At the same time, we're also understanding that halacha and kriyat Shema is for everyone, especially and including the poor. And sometimes we see that sometimes we actually try to bring the poor as our modeling point because we want to remember them. We want to be mindful of them. And this is also something that happens, you might remember, in the Mishnah in Psachim, where we learn about when we start, when Pesach, how we do Erev Pesach, how Erev Pesach works. We learn something from the Ani. The Ani plays an essential role here to remind us that in our life we can be going about things, but we have to be mindful. We can't just be shut in, we have to look out. Someone wanted to say something? Okay, and on Zoom, feel free if you have a comment or question, just let us know. We're gonna keep going, and at the end, I for sure wanna hear your feedback. I'm gonna leave a few minutes. Okay, so Rashi helpfully explains to us, why do we bring up the poor person here? What is the meaning behind the poor person example? So now we have this interpretation, Misha ha'ani, okay, from the time the poor person eats, from, what does this mean? She'ein lo ner lahadlik besudato. Okay, from when the poor person eats, since he has no candle to light for his meal. Now that's interesting. If the poor person has no candles, because candles are expensive, when might he be eating his meal? Excellent. Okay, suddenly we have a possible contradiction that the Gemara then solves and says, no, it's the same time. You might have thought that the poor person starts his meal earlier, let's say, at 4 instead of 4:30. But actually, the Gemara concludes that's not the case. Okay, so Rashi explained to us about why that is. Another thing to know about the poor person and how they eat is that they tend to be very quick because their life is more pressured in general. So the Gemara in Pesachim, we're going to learn Pesachim also before Pesach, from our winter break till Pesach, we're going to learn some about Pesach and the Seder in the Talmud. The Gemara in Pesachim also explains that the way of the poor person is that they eat in a very pressured way. Hu mesik v'ishto ofa. Okay, he's like trying to light the fire, and she's trying to cook really quickly because they don't have enough money to keep that gas going, that fire going for very long, and they want to preserve their wood. And so everything in their life is very pressured and rushed and not simple. And so again, that also helps us understand that the poor person's meal is probably very short, right? They cook it quickly, they eat it quickly, they go to bed quickly, and then they get up and try and sustain themselves the next day. And so it's an interesting point of thought to think about, which I'll leave you to think about, and we'll talk more about at the end of class today. Why is this such a significant model for the Talmud to bring all of these mentions? However, we're not done. We have to go on and see how the rest of the Talmud goes. So now the Gemara is going to finally tell us when we actually say Kriyat Shema in slightly more clear terms, okay? It's going to finally use the words Tzeit HaKochavim, which would have been a lot easier had they started with that. Okay, so now what we have is another Breita. The Gemara brings another outside Tanaitic source, and it goes as follows. Ureminhu, another contradiction, okay?
Is the Breita the same time as the Mishnah?
Yeah, so the Breitot are from the Mishnaic period. Sometimes
included.
Exactly. Sometimes they're found in a work called the Tosefta, not so important for us, but yes, they're Tanaitic sources. So Uramin, and I'm going to talk about that more this year. Uraminhu, another contradiction. From when do we say the Shema at night? So first of all, we now have a third source. We have our Mishnah, which had the exact same question. We had the poor person Breita, which had the exact same question. And now we have a third one. Also, exact same question. From when do we say Shema at night? Misha'asha b'nei Adam nichnasim le'echol pitan ba'arvei Shabbatot, divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay, what's different here? From when do we say Shema at night? From the time that b'nei Adam, people go in to eat their pitot on Erev Shabbat. It's kind of funny, right? How many different ways how many different uses they have here. So what's different from the other ones? Okay, well now we're talking about general people, your typical person, okay, everyone. And? Excellent. And the time is different. It's not just a weekday, it's Shabbat. It's that a person's coming in, and that's an interesting question. Why is Shabbat? Why Erev Shabbat?
There is an exact time that starts Shabbat.
Okay, good.
Bring in Shabbat of Ben Hashem.
Shkia, we bring it in earlier, right? And then, but we won't eat until after we accept Shabbat, so it's already after Tzeit HaKochavim.
Well,
so.
now before, so. Yeah.
But it's dark by the time we come in to eat our pita.
They were already davening at this point?
Oh, that's a whole nother question. But Kabbalah, you'll remember from last year, 2 years ago, Kabbalat Shabbat is a late addendum, but they did say certain things to bring in the Shabbat. Okay, so, but they definitely davened Mariv, and they couldn't daven Aravit until it was dark. Okay, so let's go on. The Chachamim omrim, okay, now we have a debate, another opinion. Chachamim omrim, misha'ah she'hakohanim zaka'in la'achol b'trumatan, okay? So now we have another reference to the priests who are only from when they're eligible to eat the truma. Siman ledavar. And you know what? Don't worry, if you're not sure what time the poor person eats his bread, the regular person eats their bread on Shabbat, the priest eats their truma, we have another way to tell you. Siman ledavar, we have a sign. The stars have come out. So funny that they take all this way to get there. Now they say, this is a famous Talmudic statement, even though there is no explicit proof in the Torah that the time that night begins is when the stars come out, we have a hint to it. We have an allusion. And here it brings us a source from the book of Nehemiah. Okay, now this is also unusual because when we try to prove something in halacha, we try to prove it from the Torah. The Torah is the law book. Sometimes we prove things from the prophets and the writings also. And that's what's going on here. It's less common, but it happens. And that's why they're saying it's not an actual biblical source. It's a source from the books of Nehemiah. So it's almost as good. It's an illusion. It's not exactly a proof, it's an illusion. And what does it say in Nehemiah? Nehemiah, it says, Shneamar, ואנחנו עושים במלאכה, וחטיים מחזקים ברמחים מעלות השחר עד צאת הכוכבים. So the book of Nehemiah, what's happening in the book of Nehemiah? They've come back to Jerusalem, and what are they doing there? They're building, a lot of Nehemiah, they're building walls. That doesn't have such good connotations in the world today, but they're building walls. And so they're working hard. And the description of how the time during their work, we perform the work, and half of them grasp their spears from dawn until the emergence of the stars. What's the meaning here? What are they trying to convey in Nehemiah about these people's building and work? They're devoted, they're working really hard. And their work day is from the dawn until the emergence of the stars. So if we are looking for a biblical source, all we had until now is Vayerev Vayivoker, it was night, it was day, and B'shachbacha, right? When you lay down. Now, I don't know what time you go to sleep, but I could give you, just in my family of 7, what time people go to sleep is incredibly diverse. So it's hard to say when you say Shema, if the answer is when you go to sleep. What do you do with that? That's not enough. That's a biblical source, but it doesn't teach us when we say Shema by any means. And even if in ancient times people went to bed generally when it got dark, there were probably always people who didn't. So Nehemiah comes to teach us the definition of night, the definition of when night begins. Night begins when the stars emerge. He has the words, this is the source of that phrase that we say all the time about Shabbat, Tzeit HaKochavim. And the Gemara goes on, Ve'omer, V'hayu lanu halayla mishmar v'hayom melacha. The verse goes on to say that in the night, that in the night they may be as a guard to us, and may labor in the day. Okay, and just if you want the full verses and source in the box here. So we worked on, while half were holding lances from the break of day until the stars appeared. I further said to the people at that time, let every man with his servant lodge in Jerusalem, that we may use the night to stand guard and the day to work. And so here we have in Nehemiah this source for this. Now it's interesting, why does it have to double proof Nehemiah? Why does it have to say both that it says the emergence of the stars and that they worked only in the daytime and used the night to guard? Because it's also possible that these people were working so hard that they worked into the night. And so the Gemara explains to us that the beginning of the night when they stood guard and stopped working was in fact Tzeit HaKochavim. But there's something important. There's something about markers in our day, today, it's so obvious to us, right? Who doesn't have Google Calendar and every hour you're meeting beeping, and it's very obvious to us. But in the ancient world, when really they didn't have clocks, they didn't have electricity, all they had was sunlight and dark. And they had to build their lives, the rhythm of their lives around that and their productivity around that. And they saw great symbolism in this. And here too, when we're talking about the Shema, I think it's super interesting that they're bringing as the source for from when do we say the Shema, this whole range of possibilities that we can learn from. Because when we say the Shema, we're not just reciting a prayer. It's a tefillah that we want to, it's a tefillah that we want to connect with, and that should help us as we come to the end of our day, settle in for sleep, think about the night and what the day before was, what the next day is like. The Shema provides for us, more than really any other tefillah, something in the morning and something at night. And I know that Moshe wants to continue talking about Kriyat Shema al Hamitah, then the fact that now today we have Shema in the evening prayer, Ma'ariv, and on the bed, we're going to get to that. So hold on to that, because we have not yet figured out what the Talmud here is talking about. Is it talking about the Shema as we say it in Tfilat Aravit in Shul, or the Shema that we say when we go to sleep at night, because it sounds like it's kind of both, right? Because it's when you lay down. So we still have some open questions. We need to, when we learn Gemara, we have to just live with questions. But I think that really what we see is that while on the one hand, Masechet Brachot is trying to connect us to the holiness of the Mikdash, and the Shema is a sign of spirituality, and being like, building our life, the rhythm of our day, like the rhythm of the Kohanim, trying to aspire to be like the holy Kohen. At the same time, the Shema prayer and how we think about when we say it connects us to both poor people. We shouldn't forget the poor people. We should be mindful of poor people and vulnerable people and weak people in society. And also is just saying, this is just everyday life. The Shema is not for the high and lofty. Tefillah is not for the high and lofty. A relationship with God is not for the high and lofty. It's for everyone. And this is how our entire Shas, our entire Mishnah Talmud, everything begins. This is the beginning. It's amazing the way that the rabbis managed to put all of this deeper thought into these legal statements. And so again, it's a little hard when you read the flow to gain all of this stuff, but if we read it more slowly and we break up the structure and we think about it, it provides us an opportunity to pause and say, well, what's going on here? What are the rabbis trying to say to us? What are they trying to convey about the Shema? This also gives us a sense, there's a couple more things we have to point out here about what's going on here in the Talmud. This gives us a sense that the rabbis had a lot of sources in their heads, and they had to make sense of them and create some sort of, well, this one fits with this one, like a puzzle. This one doesn't fit. And this really is the nature of the oral Torah, of the Trash Bal Peh, that there were a lot of limuds, there were a lot of teachings out there. And they had to, at the time of the writing down of the Gemara, they had to try and make some sense, make some synthesis, because people needed to practice. People needed to keep these halachot, these mitzvot. So they had a choice. They could have done something different. They could have just said, okay, you have to say Shema at night. You should say it from Tzeit HaKochavim, and then you should say it in the morning, and you say it twice a day. There's a biblical source for this. Shalom al Yisrael, have fun, good night. But they didn't do that. They they wanted to preserve and include all these different opinions. They didn't want to say, and today actually is different. I don't know if you agree with me. Today you want to know what the halacha is. You either ask your rabbi or Rabbanit, or you ask Google, or you just do whatever was done before. But you don't necessarily learn the history and the different opinions, the machlokot. Why is it so important in the Talmud to include, it's giving us a headache, right? Why do we have to know all these different opinions? And so I want to throw that out to you for a moment before we go on. Why was it so important to preserve these opinions? Susie?
I don't know if I'm answering this question, but what just sort of came up for me was that you just give someone a rule book, you follow the rule book or you don't follow the rule book. What they did was they created curiosity, which is, your topic is mindfulness, so curiosity is like a big thing. And they created curiosity that would get people engaged, to discuss, to talk about, like, what's going on here, what are they saying? So I don't know if that was your question, but that was just what came up.
Okay, super interesting. So if anyone didn't hear, Susie's talking about curiosity, that they in order to, so I think I want to say the same thing in a slightly different way. In order to get to mindfulness, in order to get to kavanah in the Shema and in Tefillah, the rabbis almost, kind of like when we, on the Pesach Seder, get the kids to ask questions, we try to get them to build the curiosity by phrasing things in slightly different ways to get us to think about it. It kind of wakes you up a little, rather than just hearing the instructions. Like, why are we bringing up the Kohanim? Why are we bringing up the Ani here? That's, I think, excellent, and I think true, and I think very much they were trying to infuse it all with much more meaning, 100%. Any other thoughts on the inclusion of all the different opinions?
Yeah. Want to preserve tradition and history and
yes,
well, some of it, because I'm sure it was unfortunate it was lost.
Exactly. Amazing. So
there's a certain amount of preservation of, we've got Google, they've got
I don't know if Google's saving us anything worthy of saving, but yeah. It's there, exactly. So Gaby's pointing out that we are preserving, right? And it's, you see how important it is to the rabbis, and we saw this all last year when we learned Akkadic stories, to say things b'shem omro, in the name of the rabbi who says it, preserving the opinions in the name of the rabbis themselves. And then you can build a picture of the different rabbis and their different approaches to things. And so it's also preserving our traditions, 100% preserving these opinions. And that this was Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh was different opinions, right? That's what it is. And we have the Torah Shebechtav, and then there's always, from the beginning of time, different opinions on how to interpret. That's the nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Charlotte,
yes,
Susie,
I wanted to say, hi. I think it's also to give a sense of dialectic, that there's not always one simple answer. Even when you come to the final answer, there was a lot of tension, and there are a lot of different ideas that we hold together when we come to that final idea.
Amazing. Susie bringing up another super important point, which is when we practice halacha, when we live, we have our ideal days, our days that go smoothly. And then we also have our days that are less smooth. And sometimes we need to rely on different opinions. If one opinion allows us to say Shema, the time that the ani eats his meal, which is, let's say, from 7 p.m. till 7:15 p.m., what happens when you miss that window? Well, then we have other opinions. We have the opinions, that's obviously not the halacha, but we have the opinions like the one in the Mishnah that allows it till the first third of the night. Then you have the opinions that you can say it until daybreak. So allowing for that dialectic, which is such an important word, allowing for the debates, for the different opinions to exist for different times, for different needs, for different people, is actually one of the very significant reasons that we preserve these opinions. Okay, Charlotte.
It also gives us the dignity of the individual opinion, which Rabbi Sachs makes a big deal of as well. He should.
Wow, very interesting. So dignity of the individual opinion, meaning even if it's rejected, even if we don't accept it, we care to hear it, we care to listen to it, we care to try and understand it, which is also about trying to live in a world where we have disagreements and can live together, and even if you fiercely disagree, right? Quite amazing. So it's actually something for us, a skill for us to take away for our lives. Amazing. So with all of that, the Gemara goes on. We don't have time to read all of it, but I want to point out that that you have it on your sheets, and basically what happens next is there's a short question which we're skipping, and then the Gemara goes on to ask on page 3, when we talk about the Breita that talks about Bnei Adam, saying Bnei Adam eating their pita on Erev Shabbat, and the Ani, the Gemara asks, are they the same time? And so there's an ongoing discussion in the Gemara about, are these different opinions in agreement? Are the times all the same? Is the Ani time, the Bnei Adam time, and the Kohanim time all the same, or are they different? Now they're asking this question about, is the time that they eat the same? But they're also asking a deeper question. Are these people the same, or are they different? And in fact, the answer is sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're different, which is also a deeper answer about humanity and Jewish people and how we all practice and how we all live. I want to just point out that, there's also another Breita, a third Breita, which is at the bottom of page 3. And here we have a longer list of possibilities. And it's fascinating to think that why the rabbis keep going on with these, why they had all these sources. This is clearly a very important topic. And we're going to see a number of some of the opinions will be the same, some will be different. So at the bottom of page 3, we have, V'ani v'kohen chad shi'urahu, is the priest and the poor person the same shiur at the same time? U'reminhu, we have a source that suggests otherwise. Matchilin likrot shma ba'aravin. Okay? From when do we recite the Shema at night? Same question. So now we have a long list of opinions about when we say Shema at night. Rabbi Eliezer says from the time you make Kiddush on Shabbat. Okay? Rabbi Yoshua says, Misha'a sha'kohanim mitoharin la'chol b'trumatan. Rabbi Yoshua says, from the time that the Kohanim purify themselves to eat their truma. Now we're on page 4. Rabbi Meir Omer, Misha'a sha'kohanim tovlin la'chol b'trumatan. So one said from the time that they can immerse, and the other one said from the time that they are purified, which is a slightly different time, kind of confusing. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, v'halo kohanim miba'od yom hem tovlim. The kohanim can actually immerse in the mikvah during the daylight hours, and then wait later and eat the truma after nightfall. So that is crazy to say that it's from the time that the kohanim go and dip in the mikvah, because that would mean you could say the nighttime Shema at 2 p.m. Rabbi Chanina Omer, Misha'a she'ani nichnas la'chol pito v'melach. Rabbi Chanina famously says, from the time the poor person comes in to eat his bread with salt. Rabbi Achai ve'amrila Rabbi Acha Omer, Misha'a sherov b'nei adam nichnasim la'aseh. So here we have a breita, which gives us almost all the opinions plus more all together. And in the end of the day, what is preserved in the Mishnah is the opinion that you say it from the time the Kohen comes in to eat his truma. But the Gemara fills in for us this picture and provides us all these other opinions. And so I wanted to show you, this is an amazing list that actually the Koren Talmud included, which is based on the interpretation of Rav Hai Gaon. Okay, so just for a moment, we're going to make seder of all the opinions. Just to give you some historical, you're going to see this slide a lot, so don't worry if you forget it or you've seen it before, you'll see it again, right guys? So this is just a little timeline. We have the 2 centers of Jewish life at this time are in the land of Israel and the land of Bavel. What we are learning here, this book, okay, the Talmud Bavli. However, the Mishnah is composed in the land of Israel. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, you can go to his where he's buried, and the Mishnah is from Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara that we are learning here is the Talmud Bavli. But know that there's an entire other Talmud called the Talmud Yerushalmi, okay, an entire other version of the Gemara, of the Talmud. And both of them are on the same Mishnah, more or less. So we have in the year 70 CE, the temple is destroyed. We have in the year 250 CE, the Mishnah, around 250, 220, 250, the Mishnah is composed. And so between 0 CE, between the Churban and 250, the rabbis are, that's the time of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, Rabban Gamliel, all the Tannaitic, Mishnaic rabbis, and their names are preserved for us in the Mishnah, and that's being written in the land of Israel. Then what happens is, the community in Israel starts to diminish because there's a lot of persecution. And so there's a Talmud produced, but it gets stopped abruptly somewhere around 400 CE because of all the persecution. And the Talmud in the land of Israel has rabbis Amoraim like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who you might remember from last year that we learned about. But the more central Talmud, which is studied for the most part, fundamentally, is being written in Bavel, okay, from 250 to around 600 CE. And then after that, we have, yeah.
So it's totally different rabbis writing the 2 different Talmuds?
No, so you have a lot of, they're going back, some of them are going back and forth. We had stories about that last year. And so we'll talk more about this as we go on, but there's crossover because traditions are being shared and there's a history of traditions that they have. So Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are quoted in both Talmuds, but they're quoted probably more in the Talmud Yerushalmi because they're living there and their stuff was known more there. And same, so they had the traditions, but they wind up having different centers, but there's tons of crossover. And sometimes we look at the Yerushalmi to help us understand the Bavli, because sometimes it's different and it can help us. But what I want to just say for now, and we'll go back over this, I promise, I'm sorry I rushed through it, is that in the year 600 to around 1000, we have a period which people don't necessarily know about, called the Gaonic period, the Geonim, right? The Geonim, it's not such a modest name. What does that mean? The geniuses, right? Well, they were geniuses.
Do they call themselves?
They call themselves. I mean, I assume their followers called them that. It became their name. Like, right? So you might have heard them. Rab Sadia Gaon, Rab Amram Gaon, Rab Hai Gaon, Rab Shrir Gaon. They, from that period, we have some of the earliest Sidurim. They take the Talmud and try, which has what we call tons of opinions, ribui deot, lots of different opinions, and they have to try and start to make some seder of it all. So we're going to see, again, we'll talk more about this as we go on. But here, before we come to an end, I just want to share with you what Rav Hai Gaon does, is that he gives different reasons for the different opinions, okay? So you have Rabbi Eliezer, opinion 1, okay, in this writer we just saw, who said, when do we say the Shema at night? From the time we sanctify Erev Shabbat. So again, now we're also making a connection between the Shema and Shabbat. That there's something that just as Shabbat, we start at night and we go into the day, and it's a day of holiness, the Shema is meant to bring that into the week as well. We have, Rav Hai explains that this is very much trying to drive home to us that night begins at sunset, because you're not going to be Mekadesh Shabbat. Today we bring in Shabbat early, but ignore that. We're not going to be Mekadesh Shabbat until the nighttime. Rabbi Yoshua says, from the time the priests are eligible to eat truma, okay, which is just like the Mishnah. And here, night begins with the appearance of the stars, okay? So possibly slightly different times here. Rabbi Meir says from when priests immerse themselves to partake of the truma. Okay, so this is similar to, I wrote like Rabbi Meir, that's wrong. I think like Rabbi Eliezer, from the time of sunset, they can go, from the stars. Like the time of the stars, the priests go and partake of their truma. Rabbi Hanina says from when the poor person enters to eat bread with salt. Okay, so now this gets really interesting. Rav Hai Gaon gives us a super interesting commentary. He says, what's the reasoning for why we learn from the poor people? And in fact, it's the same reason for Rabbi Acha, who says when we learn from when most people come in to enter to recline, which is another opinion. Okay, so Rav Hai Gaon explains to us that this is coming to say that we're not determining when we say Shema based on what's going on in the rhythm of the day and night, the stars, the sunset, but rather from ourselves. Are we basing when we say the Shema on the sun and the moon and the stars and the daily, whatever the word is, astronomy, the way the natural phenomenon of the world, thank you. Or are we learning it from when human beings, from when people and their behavior, from the behavior of people? Is the time we say Shema determined by the poor person and how he keeps his day? Or general people and how we keep our day? Okay, so the last two opinions are much more interested in learning halacha from derech eretz, from the way people function and behave on a daily basis. And this is, of course, also a very deep point. Is halacha separate from us, and just as the world turns, we turn with it? Or is it something which is completely connected to us, and it can't live separate from us, and just so much, and it has to be based on us and what we're doing, on the people, on the world, or on the people, or on some combination? And so I think that this commentary of Rav Hai Gaon is also a very deep point about, which again, why is the Gemara sharing opinion after opinion after opinion about this? Why can't they just say from this time? Ideally from this time, or you could do it at this time, okay? But they don't want to say that. They want to make a point to us. They want to say, the rabbis are trying to say, that how we spend our time and what we do with our day has tremendous meaning. And the Shema helps us frame that. And how we learn the time to say the Shema brings to us themes of so many different things. The temple, the priests, poor people, Shabbat, all sorts of different symbolism and meaning. I want to just close with a reading from a modern text, which is by, and then I want to let people say a few words also on Zoom. I apologize that we're a few minutes over because we started late. There's a great book. I don't know if any of you have started reading it or heard of it, James Clear, Atomic Habits. So it's a great book where he talks about habits and how we build habits in our life. And he basically says that big changes, when you think about making changes in your life, you think, okay, I'm gonna start exercising 3 days a week. I'm gonna start traveling. I'm gonna make these big changes. He says the way to make changes is tiny changes, tiny, small changes all the time. And he talks about the value of having habits. And he talks about a woman who, a famous woman, Twyla Tharp, who was one of the greatest dancers and choreographers of the modern era. Okay, she was credited with choreographing the first crossover ballet, and she's worked for the Paris Opera, the Royal Ballet, etc., etc. She's a tremendous woman. So he says, how does she manage to become who she became? And he quotes her in her best-selling book, The Creative Habit. Tharp discusses one of the secrets of her success. I begin each day of my life with a ritual, she writes. I wake up at 5:30 a.m., okay, God bless her, put on my workout clothes, my leg warmers.
It was off today, like 7 minutes.
Well, I want to know what time she goes to sleep. So she puts on her, so listen to her rituals. I wake up at 5:30, I put on my workout clothes, my leg warmers, my sweatshirts, my hat. I walk outside my Manhattan home, hail a taxi, and tell the driver to take me to the Pumping Iron Gym at 91st Street and 1st Avenue, where I work out for 2 hours. Okay, don't worry, we're not expected to do that. But listen what she says. The ritual is not the stretching and weight training I put my body through each morning. That's what I would have expected. The ritual is the cab, the taxi ride, okay? The moment I tell the driver where to go, I have completed my ritual. This is like a really fascinating point. It's a simple act, but doing it the same way each morning habitualizes it. It makes it repeatable, easy to do. It reduces the chance that I would skip it or do it differently. It's one more item from my arsenal of routines and one less thing to think about. So he says, let's talk about what makes Tharp's morning routine so important and how we can use it to master our own habits. The power of a ritual, or what I like to call a pre-game routine, is that it provides a mindless way to initiate your behavior. It makes starting your habits easier, and that means following through on a consistent basis as earlier. Habit researchers agree. Okay, he goes on. I'm going to skip to where it says in other words. In other words, getting started with a simple ritual like putting on a helmet or checking the air in the bike tires makes it easier to follow through on the bigger behavior, making the commutes. If you focus on the ritual, the next step follows more automatically. Twyla Tharp's morning routine is a perfect example of this idea in practice. Naturally, there are going to be days when she doesn't feel like getting out of bed and exercising. There are bound to be times when the thought of starting the day with a 2-hour workout seems exhausting. But her ritual of waking up and calling the taxi takes the emotion, motivation, and decision-making out of the process. Her brain doesn't need to waste any energy deciding what to do next. She doesn't have a debate with herself about what the steps should be. She simply follows the same pattern that she always does. And once the pattern is in motion, the rest of the sequence follows more easily. The key to any good ritual is that it removes the need to make a decision. What should I do first? When should I do this? How should I do this? Most people never get moving because they can't decide how to get started. Having a ritual takes that burden off your shoulders. And I just read this and I think about these sources and the wisdom in them, which we've written this wisdom down thousands and thousands of years ago. Framing your day with laying down at night, Kriyat Shema Alamita next week, I promise. Laying down at night and saying the Shema at night. Saying the Shema as we close our day, saying the Shema as we open our day, helps us get going, helps us move ahead in our day. And I think that that's just a small piece of what makes our tefillah and the Shema so powerful. And really, which I think the rabbis are trying to convey to us in this whole framework and discussion. So I'm here for questions, and sorry we ran a few minutes late, but I wanted to give you a full hour, and thank you. And if you haven't signed up yet, please sign up. And we have a lot of exciting programs coming up this month at Matan, so check your email. Thank you.
Just want to say something.